Okay, hello everyone and welcome to the Kiali community meeting. We are reviewing all the highlights for this Sprint 2502 and we are going to be releasing Kiali 2.5. So this is our agenda for today. We have our sprint summary, then we are going through all the new things and bug fixes for this release. Next, we will go through the preview for the next spring, and we will end by stopping the recording and having our community discussion. So this is a summary for this sprint. It was a quite busy sprint, quite busy one. We have some almost 70 issues in the Kiali repository, and of them we have like 37 issues done. We still have like 14 review, and we have another 18 in the backlog. We also have some contributions in the operator and in the documentation, kiali.io. And let's start with the sprint highlights. The first one is related to the support for the workload entries and the workload groups. I'm going to pass the mic to Heike.
Thank you, Yosune. I will share my screen. It's now shared. So the support of workload groups and workload entries, we have started it since like 2 sprints before, but finally in this sprint we have completed the epic. And when user has created those objects and virtual machines, and Istio recognizes them, on Kiali side we are displaying the workload groups alongside with the workloads. Here you can see that I filtered by these workload groups. And it is displaying there, and the type is shown as workload group, and it comes with the links to the workload group Istio config object. And also if there are some sidecars, it shows the sidecars connected to the particular workload groups. Let's go to the workload group details. And for workload groups and workload entries, we are displaying limited information, the information which is available. And that's why we have this notification message here and displaying only the overview tab, as the rest of the tabs are empty. And the actions drop down is also read-only. As workload entries, they are generated by workload group template. We are displaying it instead of the pods. Usually for regular workloads here, we display pods, but in case of workload groups, we display the workload entries if they exist. Also, it comes with the links to sidecars and workload group Istio configuration objects. So if you go to Istio configuration object workload group, then we can see it's in editor, reference to workload entry and workloads. And those workload groups are displayed as well in applications list. Then when the workload group has all the correct labels in its specification, and it has workload entries generated, it will be shown as a healthy. But when there is no workload entries, so this means that this workload group is empty, then the health is displayed as not ready. And so far they are not displayed in applications because it's not application, because it doesn't have the application label. And in Istio config list, for workload groups, we have added also validations. There are 2 validation warning messages. So in my example, I have created ratings VM workload group, and the second is ratings VM2. So when I edit the label from the spec metadata, and the workload entries are generated by this label. So if two workload groups have the same label, then this means that there will be collision until it will generate in the same namespace workload entries by the same labels. So there is a validation warning there. Also, a workload group has an option to specify service account. When the service account doesn't exist in this namespace, it will show a validation warning. In this case, those validations are not error, but are warning, because the workload groups are like supported, but they are supported in a limited way, as is shown here. So that's why we are not displaying errors, but instead displaying warnings. And alongside with this topic, I will also demo the next slide, as I've already shared. It's about the links between Kubernetes gateway objects and workloads. So for Kubernetes gateway workloads, we are now displaying links to Istio configs. Here you can see linking it, and Istio configs is the cross-reference to workload, and also it has a reference to HTTP route, the route which is configured to use this Kubernetes gateway. And from this route, we are showing again to gateway, but as well as to the service, to those services which are configured for this HTTP route and which is configured to the Kubernetes gateway. So it reference from services to gateways to routes and vice versa. So that's it from these two features which were completed in this sprint. So I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Haik.
Thank you, Josine.
Nice demo. Okay. So I will continue. This one, it was the last part of the demo that Haik did about the Istio configuration references for the Kubernetes gateways. And the next highlight is about the mesh space, because we have added some new objects, display objects, the gateways and the waypoints. And for this feature, I'm going to pass the mic to Jay.
Thank you, Josine. I will also share my screen and do a short demo of this. But just to stay on the slide for a second, in version 2 of Kiali, we introduced the mesh page, which is the new topography view of your mesh. And we're going to be continually revising and adding to this. And we added new infrastructure that's going to be available in the 2.5 release for gateways and waypoints. It does support revisions, and it came along with some improved side panel formatting, which we'll show in a second. Let me just share out. All right, so again, down on the bottom left of your Kiali console, you have the mesh option. If you select that, you're going to get a topography of or a graph of your mesh infrastructure. And it already shows things like, where your Kialis are, where your control planes are, deployed in which clusters and which namespaces. If I had a multi-cluster environment here, the various clusters would be showed. I can see that I've got my Grafana, Prometheus, and Jaeger add-ons as external deployments. They're outside of the mesh, actually. And on the right side here in the side panel, we have a newly formatted and hopefully a better summarization of the different infrastructure components that are in your mesh, right? So it just gives you a quick count of how many clusters you've got, control planes, and so forth down on the right side. So there's a new display menu. This is being introduced with this feature, and it gives you two different options, either to show gateways and to show waypoints, basically. If I go ahead and show gateways, you can see that it showed up over here on the right side, updated my summary, and you can see that you've got book info gateway showing up. And if I select that node, you're going to get a summary of that gateway configuration. It's going to tell you what revision it's dealing with, and you can see that it's linked to that revision of the control plane. If we had like a canary going on, you'd be able to see links to the correct control plane based on revision. Similarly, if you're in an ambient environment, you'll have this second option. If you're not in an ambient environment, you won't see this. But if I select waypoints, again, you'll see that in the book info namespace, I had both this gateway, but I've also got a waypoint deployed. And analogously, if I select that node, you're going to get information about the waypoint. And in both cases, you'll have a link to the workload that's relevant up here in the header section of the side panel. So if I'm on the waypoint, I can go to the waypoint workload. If I select book info gateway again, I can jump over to the workload detail, and from there, do all the things that I would normally do. And from waypoint, we can jump over to the waypoint workload detail, which allows you to also link to the config if you want to look at the YAML. And it also gives you the new, this is what I believe we added this in the last sprint, the whole waypoint detail information that we've got added for when you're looking at the detail of a waypoint in particular. And that is it, with the only difference being this summary view continues if you were to select a cluster. You'll get a narrowed view that just summarizes the components, infrastructure components on that cluster. And then similarly, if I select a namespace, I'll get a view that's narrowed down to just that namespace on that particular cluster. All right, and that is it. Thank you, Jasune.
Thank you, Jay, for the demo. And this is a nice addition. Yeah, let's continue with the sprint highlights. This is another related to ambient, and it's about the tracing correlation. And I'm going to share my Kiali instance to show you the change on this topic. So when you have ambient mesh, the traces are going to be emitted when you have a waypoint proxy by the waypoint proxy. And the waypoint is going to use as a service name the waypoint proxy name. So when you want to have a look at the traces related to one of the workloads of our mesh, you are going to have to identify the waypoint proxy. Then you need to look for the waypoint proxy service name in the tracing. And then you need to filter the traces by the operation name, which is the same as our application. But in Kiali, we wanted to make this more easy and have all the information together in our details view of our workload. So in this example, we are seeing the traces from the workload product page in the details that are already filtered by the operation name that is a product page. So if we go here and we see the reported service name, which is really from the waypoint name, but here we can see the related traces from our application, and Kiali is also highlighting the trace, the span, which is related to the operation name with this application. And it happens the same with this filtering about, for example, in the inbound or the outbound metrics. So if we select here both and we click spans, we are going to also have this correlation between our metrics and the spans that are related to our workload. It also happens the same in the logs tab. So if we click on spans and we click on the cTunnel, we are going to be able to see the traces that are related to our, the span traces that are related to our application. And also we can correlate these traces because this is ordered by the timestamp with the cTunnel logs that are also related with our application and also with our application logs, which is going to make it easier to relate all this information, and especially if we are trying to troubleshoot anything. And the last screen that I wanted to share is in our applications map when we are selecting a service. And we click on the traces, so we are going to see all the related traces of our application, and we are going to see a trace overlay. I wanted to explain here why this trace is not complete, and this is because at the moment there is no information about the workload in the trace that is emitted by this waypoint proxy. This is probably an enhancement that it will be done in Istio. But at the moment, as this information is not available, well, Kiali could guess that its trace was from this this trace operation was handled by this version 1 of the product page workload. But in this case, that we have two different versions of the reviews workload. In this case, we don't know, and we kind of lost track of this trace. So probably that, and hopefully that could be an enhancement for future releases. I'm going to share the presentation again. Okay, so let's continue with the highlights for this sprint. This one is related to Backstage. As many of you already know, there is a plugin for Kiali in Backstage. And as a highlights, we wanted to mention that the code was migrated from the Janus repository to the Backstage CMCF. And there are is divided in two plugins. One is the Kiali plugin and the other is the Kiali plugin backend. And the other highlight is the support for multiple Kiali providers. There is the issue linked here in case you want to find and have more information about it. Regarding other notable changes, there is a document as a design proposal for offline data processing that is going to be outside the actual request. So the data that can be calculated offline is going to be done outside the request, and with this we are looking to improve the performance. Also, there has been some updates in the documentation, updating the last ambient changes. Related to the operator, there is now support for the topology spread constraints in the deployment config and also in the Helm charts. Another change in the operator was the support for required authentication for the API endpoint. And related to this, there was also a change in the server that allows us to be able to authenticate the API endpoint to require user authentication for the information that provides the version and the configuration version in Kiali. We want to thank you, the reporter, Sergey Kanibor. And there was some updates to unify the styles in the inline alerts. So all of them are going to be looking the same. And some improvements regarding the tests for some integration test to not fail when there is a missing application list. Related to the bug fixes, one of those was related to ambient. There was an error when we were reading logs and we click on the cTunnel checkbox and the users didn't have permissions. So now Kiali is going to be using the service account to read cTunnel logs and then to filter them by the logs that are just relevant to the application that the user is allowed to see. Related to OpenShift, there was an error, and how the error was handling when we log into a remote cluster when we are in an OpenShift strategy. There was another bug fix in multi-cluster. There was added a filter by namespace in validations, and this error was happening when we have a validations call and one of the namespaces was not existent in one of the clusters. Another bug fix was related to the store the theme in the local storage, which can be the light or dark theme. And a fix related to the refresh on the duration change in the details page tabs. So this is a preview of the next sprint. We are going to continue to work on the fix in progress, the ambient one, support, and other related to the improved Kiali Wizards UI. And we are continue to work on some issues in progress related to other different topics. And also we still have 18 issues in our backlog for the next sprint. And I'm going to stop the recording and to have the community discussion. Thank you.